as you all know, there was this student sit-in here 2 years ago, and then it raises a number of very interesting ethical questions. So I have here, it's not systematic, it's just some thoughts. Several points. First point is, which framework would be appropriate, deontological or consequentialist? So should we talk about rights, right to free education, right to knowledge, or we should talk about desirable and undesirable consequences of free or unfree education and of student occupation of sit-in or blockada, student blockada, it was called blockada. Then the second point is moral luck. Third point is solidarity. Fourth point is something that I call moral blackmail and moral hostages. And fifth point is instrumentalization. Then sixth is consistency. And that would be it. Yeah, there's something about direct democracy, but I wouldn't go into it today. So there is one objection, very common and simple and largely well-grounded objection against this student protest. And that's the objection that, well, they don't, what they want? Why do they protest? Well, they don't know, they just protest. Because students in Germany are doing that, then in Austria, and then our students are doing. So what they want? Well, they don't know what they want. They want fun, they have fun, they're sleeping there. It's just, well, they're acquainted with each other, friendship, they live together, they cook together. It's just kind of camping on the university. There's no point. They don't know what they want. So they're making trouble, and they don't know what they want. So in a sense, it is, well, there is some weight. This objection has some weight, because they articulated their demands, as far as I remember, the demand for free education was articulated after 2 weeks. So it took them 2 weeks to articulate one demand. However, personally, I wouldn't give too much weight to this objection. So why not? So we can have emotive reactions, and we do have emotive reactions, and our emotive reactions can be appropriate or inappropriate, and we cannot verbalize them. But nevertheless, so well, we protest, we think something is unfair, or something should or should not be like that, and so on. So we have some moral emotions, and we cannot articulate them. Or we, as a professional philosophers, we are better in articulating these reactions. So, and since our reactions can be appropriate or inappropriate, the question is not whether they were able to articulate the points of their protest, but whether such, let's say, rational reconstruction of their attitudes can be, whether we can do the rational reconstruction of their claims, and whether these claims are justified. For instance, a baby can cry, can complain. Baby complains about something. Baby cannot articulate the problem, what's wrong, but the complaint can be justified or unjustified. The baby is hungry, or we should change the diaper, or so on. So, well, it's maybe over patronizing, but I think that it's not a real problem that, in fact, they did not right away or before they started the protest, that they did not articulate their demands. So, well, we have this Strawson's view on these reactive attitudes. He even thinks that moral responsibility should be grounded in reactive attitudes. So maybe we should start just with reactive attitudes. So the students, they are dissatisfied with something. So, okay, then let's take a pencil and paper and find out what are they dissatisfied with. So the fact that they didn't articulate their demands does not have the serious weight. Now, which framework would be better? I don't have a consequentialist or deontological. I don't have the answer. Don't have the answer, but it's interesting as a question. So should we talk about desirable and undesirable consequences, or should we talk about rights, no matter of the consequences? Good consequences, well, in my opinion, free education and fight for free education is good consequence. Then solidarity, sense of joint effort among students, blah, blah, these all consequences are good. Bad consequences are that teaching was not done. In fact, that there was even a risk that students will lose 1 year, that professors who teach them, their professors would in principle be fired, so okay, nobody was fired, and so on. So we can, in consequentialist framework, we should put on weight just good and bad consequences and then try to see what's right, what's wrong. So maybe consequentialism is a simpler view. That's the general consequentialist point, that we always know what we have to do. We don't have conflict of duties, we calculate it and we know what to do. So you, the ontologists, you are blocked, you are paralyzed, we are not. Well, maybe consequentialist is better, maybe it's not. Then are they students responsible, were they students responsible for the bad consequences? That's an interesting question. In one sense, in the sense of causal responsibility, they obviously were responsible for both good and bad consequences. Since they initiated the action, that was their action, and they bear the responsibility for the consequences. They are responsible. So double effect trick won't work here, just as it works almost nowhere, or nowhere or almost nowhere. So they cannot say that that bad effects are not their fault. Well, they are responsible for bad effects as well. One interesting thing is the idea of sacrifice. So there were students who started this protest, and then they blocked teaching to other students who wanted to have their lectures and seminars, and to teachers who wanted to teach. So they blocked others. Do they have right to do it? Wow. Well, their cause justifies, if it justifies cause justifies the action. However, also there is one additional element, this is the element of sacrifice. They care about these lectures. They enroll philosophy or cultural studies or whatever, not for money, not for good career or something, but because they are interested in this subject. That's something that they want. They wanted lectures and seminars. So in this occupation or this sit-in, what they actually did, they sacrificed the thing that they cared for. And that's a usual thing in this practice of sacrificing. So that the chief should sacrifice a virgin daughter or something, or if we have to kill a lamb, to sacrifice a lamb to Yahweh or something, then the lamb should be fat. It should be good lamb, not something old or slim. It should be fat lamb, or it's so on, so on. So if we sacrifice something, we have to sacrifice something that we care for, something that it has a value. So for them, this teaching had a value, and they did sacrifice that. So that partly gives them right to block that process to others. Now, the second point is moral luck. Thomas Nagel, in his article on moral luck, he gives one example. So that's the standard seminal article. He gives one of the examples. Is a revolution in some banana republic somewhere in Latin America. We have a horrible regime, and there is a horrible regime there, and some military junta, some tequila guerrilla country. and we organize a revolution. There we start a revolution. So, and the Nagel's point is the following. So if a revolution succeeded, the organizers are heroes. They're moral heroes because they overthrown the military junta, the horrible regime. So they liberated the people, they freed the people, and they're moral heroes. However, if a revolution fails, then the junta, the regime, will revenge and will do a lot of damage, will kill a lot of civilians and so on. And in that case, Nagel says that organizers of the revolution will be responsible for all these victims. So they will be morally very bad. That would be adventure, irrational adventure. So the course of event will show that they were wrong. So then that's Nagel's example for a case of moral luck. So that the organizers of revolution must have some military luck. If they have military luck, they will be moral heroes. Otherwise, not. Otherwise, they will be morally bad. They will be responsible for regime's revenge. However, so we have the analogy with the organizers of the protest. If the protest is successful, then they would be their merit. So the success and the free education will be their merit. They'll have a deserve. We would think they're very good. On the other hand, if their protest fails, then we should condemn them because they started something that didn't bring about the desired results. I think that Nagel is wrong here, actually. I think that he is wrong. That he is wrong. What we estimate is not the success. It's not the success, but not the actual consequences, but rather the intended consequences. So well, we have moral heroes like Spartacus. Spartacus is a moral hero. Many sport clubs all over the world have a name, Spartacus, and so on. Then Matija Gubec, he's a medieval Croatian serf who was leading a rebellion against the feudalists and so on, and they were surprisingly successful. So they had their republic for a few weeks and they were killed. Or the sailors from Kronstadt during the October Revolution who fought. So well, they were all losers. Matija Gubec was a loser, Spartacus was a loser, sailors from the Kronstadt in Russia, they all lost and they were all killed. However, in spite of that, we perceive them as moral heroes, not on the ground of the results that they brought about, but on the ground of the desired results, or on the ground of maybe just the courage for rebellion. So it seems that Nagel is wrong here, and we do not only judge actual consequences, but intended consequences and other things. So the same thing holds for a student, this student protest. We should not judge their actions on grounds of actual consequences, but rather on grounds of intending consequences, on the grounds of their cause, what they were fighting for. So we should judge them according to that, not according to the actual consequences. So in the case, so these student protests, in fact, it seems that they brought some change. They did have some good effect. But now the question is, who is guilty? That's an interesting question. Now, who is guilty for the damage that was done? The damage was, first of all, the fact that lectures were not held. So the process of education was broken. So that's the damage. There are other damages, organizational matters, but okay. So who is responsible for the damage? Okay, so students, they started this occupation. They started the protest, so they're guilty. Or we can say, no, who is guilty? The state administration who passed tacitly, passed step by step an unjust law, they are guilty. So who is guilty for the bad consequences? So one who is responsible for the unfair state of affairs, or one who starts a protest. And then what can we claim? We can claim that in order to decide who is guilty for the bad consequences, we can even go to the possible worlds and try to see which possible world is closed. The one in which there is no protest of students, or the one in which there are no scholarship. And then we should claim that according to that, so whose interference into reality is larger and bigger, it is his responsibility. So very speculative idea. So we have a good question, good example for responsibility is the Warsaw Rebellion in Poland in 1944. So in 1944, Poland was occupied by Germans, and the Russians, Red Army, they were approaching to Poland. And they came to Warsaw. They to the river, to the bank of river. So they were already on town. And then Polish resistance movement, then they organized a rebellion, armed rebellion against the Germans. And they counted on they were encouraged by allies, by Brits and Americans, and they counting on Russians, that Russians will anyway run over the Germans. However, what the Russians did, I think it's well-known examples, Russians stopped their advancement. And Russians waited until Germans killed all the Poles and destroyed whole town. It was a horrible damage. And when Germans killed all the Poles, then Russians continued their advancement. It was a horrible damage. It seems that something like 200,000 civilians were killed, about 50,000 Polish soldiers, plus about 20,000-30,000 German soldiers, plus 700,000 people had to leave town. So, serious damage. So who is responsible for that damage? Poles who initiated the rebellion, Germans who did the shooting, or the Russians who didn't help. So who is guilty? So in the case of this student protest or student occupation of the university, so who is guilty for the bad consequences? Student who initiated the protest, or the state administration who tacitly, step by step, introduced unfair and unjust law? So it seems that, being causally responsible for something is obviously linked with being morally responsible, but causal responsibility did not be neither sufficient nor necessary condition for moral responsibility. Then the third interesting issue is solidarity. So many times we are talking about should we do it or not, and then many times we are in such situation that either we will do it, all of us, or none of us. So there are things like revolutions or protests or strikes, they have point only if everybody is joining. If it is 50-50 or 20-80 or 30-70, then it doesn't have a point. And this is interesting from ethical perspective. This is interesting because what's the right thing for me to do depends not only on some static circumstances, objective features of the situation, but on the social dynamics. What's right for me to do depends on what's right for others to do and what others will do. So if everybody joins a strike, then I should not be a strike breaker, I should join it as well. If nobody will follow me in a strike, then I should not start the strike. So it depends on the social dynamics. And we are and everybody is kind of aware of this solidarity. So now this is an interesting situation. A group of students start the protest. So what should others do? Should others ignore it, join it, avoid it, support it, try to suppress it, call the police? So what should others do? Then there is a case of solidarity. So we are students of the same university. We are students of the same faculty. We are teachers of these students are our students. So we should agree or not, like it or not, we should support them. And that's this idea that we should stick together. Together we are stronger. So we kind of identify with, so students among themselves, teachers with students, members of one faculty, students of all universities, all students of Croatia, all students of Europe, and world, so on. So there are these solidarities. There are these solidarities, and solidarity primarily operates through this everybody or nobody. So if others are going into strike, then I should join as well. Now, should we identify with, well, should a teacher identify with students and their efforts? Well, it should. I think it should, otherwise it's not a real professor. Well, if he or she does not identify with the students. Should to a certain degree. Then what is this, when this protest started, so first few days, everybody was surprised or supporting, and already after a week, first week nobody complained, very nice, yeah, finally they organized, they stick together, so you see, we were proud, many people, teachers were proud on students. So for first week, they had the support. However, after the first week, things became boring. Things became boring, and then people started criticizing this protest more and more. So, how is that we support thinking Monday, and the next Monday we don't support it anymore, or after 5 Mondays we are crazy about it? So are we consistent? And it seems that is this consistent, or if it is right in Monday, then it's permanently forever, right? So it seems that again we have the thing is not static. Thing has its dynamics in time. One could argue like this. So, well, you proved your point. Journalists were where? You were on television, you were in newspapers. So that was the point. Everybody saw. Now let's continue the teaching. Otherwise, if we don't continue the teaching, we are just increasing the damage. So as this occupation or sitting is longer and longer, the damage is larger and larger. So the optimum would be, say, 1 week. So after a week, we don't agree anymore. After 2 months, we strongly disagree. Then again, what one should do depends on what will others do still. And that's the question of whether there is a critical mass of going into some revolution or change or pressure or what, or how to estimate for these moral reformers and so on. So this is the same nexus of question. Now, so there is solidarity and identification. Okay. Now about this moral blackmail and moral hostages. So what would be a moral blackmail? Moral blackmail, there are situations in which I do something, and by doing that, I'm putting you into a situation that you are under obligation to do something else. If you don't do it, you're bad. And that's the moral blackmail. I will not kill a member of your family, but if you don't do it, you will be bad people, bad person. So, for instance, the child refuses the food. Mother prepared the food, the child does not want to eat soup. Now what? Child does not want to eat, and mother does not want to prepare another dish. And they can wait for days. So in a sense, mother is a moral hostage of the child's stubbornness. Because if she doesn't prepare something else, then she's a bad mother. Or there are cases where somebody who is small and weak is provoking somebody who is big and strong. And the one who is big and strong cannot attack, cannot use force against the small one, just because he's bigger and stronger, so he has more responsibility. And then the small one can keep on provoking one by morally blackmailing, because if the bigger and stronger reacts, then, oh, you are attacking me, you're big and strong, you're attacking me, I'm small. Yeah, but you are provoking. But nevertheless, he reacted. So the similar situation is in Israel. We have Israelis and Palestinians. Palestinians are smaller and weaker. They don't have army. They have some homemade rockets or something. Well, Israelis have real army. And assuming that they are more or equally bad or equally nervous or whatever, Israelis are more guilty just because they're stronger. So they are under kind of moral blackmail. Now, these moral blackmails and moral hostages, these situations of solidarity, when we start these protests or strikes or something, I don't want to strike, I think we have a fair wage, but others started. And I think it's wrong that we shouldn't go to strike. But then I'm under moral blackmail by my fellow workers, co-workers, because I should not be a strike breaker. We should stick together. And there is this, I call it, invisible lasso of moral obligations. And this invisible lasso of moral obligations was very interesting during this student occupation. So other students, they wanted teaching, they wanted lectures on one hand, but on the other hand, they had to show solidarity with the ones who started the protest. Teachers as well. So teachers mostly wanted to teach, but they, on the one hand, but on the other hand, they wanted to support the students. And these things, this moral lasso and moral blackmail, is interesting. Well, Robert Nozick has an example. Man comes to your street in front of your house and he plays some music, some instrument. And he plays very nicely. You listen to that music, you enjoy. And now he is finished and he puts a hat there, he collects money. Do you have obligation to give some money to him? Well, yes, because you listen to music, he played well, you enjoy it, so you are under obligation. But on the other hand, you are not under obligation. Who called him? He came by himself. You did not call him. You had no previous contract. So Nozick's point is that you don't have any obligation to give any money because you didn't have any previous deal. But in a sense, it's at least not nice if you don't give him anything. Or there is a known example on Pacific, there is a tribe. And they have very developed and complicated system of favors. They do favors to each other, they help each other, but they keep the record of these favors. Then they have to return these favors. And that is kind of a blackmail. So I help you painting your fence, but then you are under obligation to help me doing something else. So talking about this invisible lasso and moral blackmail, one of the bad things is that other people, the organizers of the protest, in fact, did use other people as a means for achieving their own ends. Now, the argument against the instrumentalization was that, by the organizers of the occupation, was No, well, look, we are fighting for your interest as well. So this is your interest as well. So we are not instrumentalized for our purposes because we have the common purpose. Yeah, but I don't want the occupation. I want the teaching. No, but it is in your interest. It is your right, your interest, so you should join us. But I'm not joining you. So the question is whether it's appropriate or not to say that others were instrumentalized through this moral obligation or invisible moral lasso. So even if they didn't have the intention to instrumentalize somebody, they did. And there's a final point is about consistency. So consistency is usually regarded as a virtue. And there were many inconsistencies during this student occupation. For instance, we are blaming people who are inconsistent, usually normally, but on the other hand, not necessarily. For instance, Thomas Capitan, a philosopher from US, who was from Friedrich, said during the protests, I think he was studying in Minnesota in 70s or some 60s, 70s. He was one of the organizers of the protests, and they were preventing any teaching at the university. However, since he was a student of philosophy, Herbert Feigl was there, and they were all going to Feigl's lectures. And when the other students came there and tried to stop Feigl from teaching, they threw them out. They were doing that to other teachers, other professors, but since this was Herbert Feigl, one of the best philosophers in the world, and they threw everybody out. Please, professor, keep on. So Feigl had a dilemma. He was thinking for about 20 minutes. He was staring through the window. Then he said, "No, I will not teach. I will not teach until the end of this protest." Leszek Kolakowski, he wrote a book under the title "The Praise to the Inconsistency." He said that we should be very happy for inconsistency, because if we were perfectly consistent, we would all kill each other very soon. So we have to be inconsistent, and it's a good thing that we are inconsistent. I think that in fact, that was also the case here. The same students that were blocking others to do the teaching were coming to lectures if they were interested in. So in a sense they were inconsistent, but we should not blame and we should praise it. The colleague Kardum said, "Oh, they are great. These mine are even worse. They neither protest nor go to the lectures." Yeah, so I'll stop here.
About this issue of moral luck, you mentioned, I think there is partly an issue of luck in the sense that all human decisions are under some uncertainty, so you never know in advance what will happen. However, there is an issue remarked by theoreticians and even practitioners of civil disobedience, saying that what is needed, and what in fact seemed to me to be a major defect of this student sit-in, that there must be a very conscientious and serious evaluation about the possible success. So just merely entering in civil disobedience for the sake of civil disobedience, or even without carefully thinking about the possible consequences, is certainly a mistake. So King calls, this is part of what King calls self-purification, is that meetings and thinking before entering.
Almost kind of a
disobedience.
meditation
And
before the action.
a similar issue appears in relation to another aspect, but it is maybe the other side of the same coin. What seems to me to be endorsed by all theoreticians and practitioners of civil disobedience is that if you can obtain the same goal by less radical means, it's better the radical means. So if you can obtain something by public speech instead that by disobedience, is better the public speech. Or going back to Nenad's example of the flag, if you can obtain the same result by simulating to break the law, and criminal law in Croatia forbids to cut the flag, then it is better to do this than real cutting, the real art of cutting the flag. And it seems to me that in the flag case, they were right, because they obtained the same result of showing insensibility toward freedom in Croatia, and insensibility in the sense of giving more importance to national myths and symbols than to real life issues. And here a similar question of moral act in some sense appears again, in the sense that you never know whether a way could be more efficient than civil disobedience. So in the case of flag, they had luck in the sense that it was as efficient as a real, how to say, protest in the sense of really breaking the law. In the case of our students, we don't know whether they would obtain the same goal, but I think it was a mistake that they even didn't try a different way. The first movement was to enter in this act of civil disobedience. Now here two issues appear that in some sense you can say it is a mistake to enter directly because you have firstly to try other means. But there is another thing where some aspect of luck appears, and here I quote King, who says, postponed justice is denied justice. So in some sense, maybe sometimes if you try before different means that maybe are less effective, you in fact postpone and therefore deny justice to some people, maybe to the generations who couldn't study at university because they do not have money to pay scholarships. But again, here I would say it's not a mere issue of luck, in the sense that again a deep and big defect of this student protest was that they even didn't think about this. So although there is some aspect of luck that seems to me to be as related to all human behavior, because you never can with total certainty anticipate what happens, certainly you can put as a necessary requirement to seriously think about possible consequences of different acts. So could we obtain the same thing with the public protest that is not sitting in the university? They never pose the questions.
So for the sake of simplicity, I didn't talk about whether they had other means or better means. They insisted on the fact that it's the only mean available. So that doesn't matter. Well, for this point, it's not so relevant for the point of moral luck. So let's assume that in this tequila guerrilla state, let's assume that the only possible way is a revolution. It's a civil war. So that's the only possible way. And of course, that one who starts the revolution, he has the obligation to calculate the probability of the outcome. It's a philosophical question. What he should use, which pattern, but he has that obligation. So, but nevertheless, the outcome is uncertain. And I would say that somebody who was, let's say, epistemically correct. He calculated everything. He estimated his strength, how many people he has, what armament do they have, how strong or weak the regime is, and so on. So if the probability, if he has a reasonable probability of success, then it seems justified to start the rebellion. And there is element of luck. And if they fail in spite of that, then according to Nagel, they're guilty. And it seems that their common sense intuitions clash. We think that Gubec is a moral hero, Spartacus is a moral hero, Kronstadt sailors are moral heroes. Even though they lost, we could even say that was this Matija Gubec, was he idiot? What he thought that he could change the feudalistic social system or what? Of course, that it was not possible for him. Well, they had some more or less reasonable, direct aims. They want to throw away one feudalist abuse, Fragatahi. They wanted to get protection from the king directly, and so they were not completely naive. They had some plan, but nevertheless they lost. So that's the point, that even though they lost, they are, let's say, moral heroes, or at least they're good guys. That would be the point. And other things that you said about the student protests, they're true. Yeah, they are true, definitely.
Student protests.
Yeah.
I had one question that related to moral luck as well, so I'll maybe ask that and then go at the bottom of the queue for another question. I wondered whether the students can make use of the argument you offered them in terms of invoking the intended consequences as opposed to actual consequences. You know, that it should be the cause they're fighting for, it should be their, that's what they should be assessed by. Given that they didn't articulate for at least 2 weeks what it was they were actually fighting for. So while I sort of agree with your point that we can acknowledge that there's complaint here and sort of read into it what that complaint, what might ground it. When we're defending those who are protesting, given that they didn't have a clear understanding of what their intentions were,
these
can
two
we,
things don't go together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as less deliberation they had, less responsible, less serious they were. So even if successful in achieving desired ends, good ends, their merit is lower than their merit. Then it seems if they planned, if they articulated their claims, if they realistically estimated the possible outcomes and so on, and they were successful. Okay, fine, great. But if they just had a reaction or some accumulated frustration, like something, and that brings about good and desired consequences, then these consequences still are good and desired, but their merit is much lower. It's more and more matter of chance. It becomes matter of chance, not matter of deliberation and plan. It's just something that happens. It's kind of instinctive reaction.
Oh, sorry.
You want to just follow up?
No, that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question, but firstly, only to understand properly, you think that student protest is civil disobedience act? or not?
Is?
Civil Disobedience Act.
Oh, well, depends on the definition, but I would say yes. Well,
Yes.
yeah.
So,
Otherwise-
because you know why you're here.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
I'm-
but I think it's
I'm in
very
the wrong
important.
room.
Yeah. Only because it seems to me very interesting, you know, the question about the moral obligation of the other people toward the Civil Disobedience Act, you know, because it seems to me that you claim that actually we have, or the people have the moral obligation to support the civil disobedience actors in some circumstances.
Yeah.
So I'm interested actually under which circumstances, because it seems to me that you mentioned that probably I'm morally obliged to support the students if the successfulness of their act depends on me, or if I share with them, you know, the motivation, the moral conviction of, or if it's very interesting for me if I do not share, you know, the moral conviction based on civil disobedience, but I recognize the value of solidarity, you know. So what is the circumstances and whether I have the moral obligation to support any civil disobedience act?
Well, maybe not something that's going on in New Zealand or something, because it's just too far away, but
It's down the road.
yeah. But in the case of this student protest, we were close enough to feel that obligation of doing this or that. So we were close enough to feel it. All of the things that you said. We can, as a teachers, as professors, can support students because professors agree with students and they share the same values, methods, aims, and whatever. Or the professors can support students even if they disagree, but they respect the autonomy of the students' view and they believe that it is important that students can express their views even if their views were wrong. So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities, so that we can support them because they are our students. We can support them to train them to fight for justice in the life in the future. We can support them because we believe that they are right. We can. So there is a whole spectrum of possibilities.
It's very complicated. So
Yes, it is.
in some
Yeah.
senses, you know, because
Or we can believe that they are wrong, or
Yeah.
we can believe that was
I believe that they're-
the usual formulation is the cause is right, but the method is wrong, or so on, so on.
But you will say that it depends on circumstances, or that in most circumstances actually we are obliged to, as a professors, to.
No, it depends on the circumstances.
What circumstances, you know? Because, for instance, I thought that I think that I do not share, you know, the moral conviction, the basis of Civil Disobedience Act, but I recognize the value of solidarity. You know,
Okay.
have I moral obligation to support them? This is breaching, yeah, it's kind of breaching the law.
Do you have? Well, one might claim that you do have the obligation to help them because your belief that they are wrong is false because they are right. So no matter what you think, you have to help them because they are right. But you falsely believe that they are wrong. One can say that, or one can say, so what, solidarity is the objective of virtue, and since you are their professor, you should show at least some solidarity, or more or less, or whatever, some measure of solidarity. Therefore, agree with them or not, you should show some solidarity. That's one of the options. You are a bad professor if you don't show any solidarity. Then they are not your students, in the full meaning of being your or something. So there is a whole spectrum of of possibilities. So if somebody is doing some act of civil disobedience somewhere, depending how close we are by our interest, even by space, by common values, common aims, common interests, we can have an obligation to help them.
No, I think there is something interesting in this student occupation in the sense of what justifies the civil disobedience. Because actually their demands were addressed to government, and the leading party actually won the elections. In one of the programs was we want a society of knowledge. So actually they said this is our view of society of knowledge. When they started student occupation, the Minister of Higher Education said, "That's right, I'm trying to do this with Prime Minister for 5 years." So actually they didn't have any real enemies, so they were occupying building and everybody was saying, yes, they're right, they're absolutely right. So actually I think that one of the things that justifies civil disobedience that I didn't found is somehow to press the government to do what they said that they will do. So it's not only in how to say, ispravljati. It's not only in correcting the injustices or aiming at some just aim that is far away, but it's just, you said, the society of knowledge, nothing is happening. We don't see that society is very knowledgeable. So
They charge fee still.
so we think that charging fees will tell us where we are wrong. And nobody said them that they're wrong. Somehow I think that the best thing to justify civil disobedience is actually to press government to stick to the program. Because usually the governments want programs, the parties want elections and programs that are very good, popular, and then they do some other things and everybody forget what was on program. So I think that somehow civil disobedience is the best way to tell to the government, there is your program, so what about this? I don't know, maybe.
Well,
Because I never read it,
Can
that it
be, can
is,
be.
it's always some correcting injustice. They didn't do
Yeah, you
injustice,
can
they
protest
didn't do
because they have
anything.
wrong aims, or you can protest because they have right aims at the declarative level, but they don't realize it. So you can use civil obedience in all of these cases.
sort of speaks to the discussion before about democratic processes. That's another democratic argument for it's justified building, provided the content of the promises is defensible content.
It's real.
Yeah.
Here the good reason can be democratic deficit, what we appeal. There is a public endorsed policy that in fact the government then does not pursue in the real life. This can be.
Oh, and that is under democratic deficit.
This is a democratic deficit.
Okay.
But I don't think it's articulated quite that way of holding the government to account for their comments. It was so it sort of follows on from this discussion of teachers' responsibilities. Does a commitment to solidarity with students include an obligation on the part of a lecturer to advocate civil disobedience to students when they're not doing anything in sort of support of their own interests? And the reason I ask in part is due to some historical cases. In Canada, there was a law professor who told her students, you collectively should refuse to give your mock marks to these law firms, who's law profs and law students, these Toronto law firms that want your informal mock marks to decide whether or not to give you a summer job. You collectively should declare that you got A's on your mock exams. You should not give them these marks because they don't meet sort of formal standards for internal assessment. They're just for your use. And students did misrepresent themselves, but they didn't collectively publicly declare they got A's. Some of them said they got an A when in fact they got a B minus, and others just inflated their marks. And the university came down very harshly on her as a teacher, that she had advocated to her students that they behaved in a way that was unconscionable. And so I guess one question is, should you as a teacher, in the name of solidarity to your students, say you should be holding a sit-in, you should be breaching the law in response to the injustices of current education practices? Is that how far our obligations go?
So, what's exactly question about? About giving them instructions what to do, how, talking them into, or
Yeah.
what exactly depends. In my opinion,
Is our sorry.
yeah, it depends. One could easily be accused of manipulating with students. So if it is their protest, it's their protest. So what does it mean showing solidarity? Well, don't teach during the protest, or help them something. They organized some kind of alternative teaching, and who wanted could come and give and lecture on something else, on something like not on what you are supposed to lecture Wednesdays, but on something else. So that was kind of showing the support or something. Maybe teacher, well, assuming the teacher knows better, teacher might have obligation to explain to them what's going on and how things work. And I think that teacher should not influence on their decisions. Should not tell them what to do.
Does that create a problem for the idea of rational
Because because one of the points is this autonomy, developing their and recognizing their autonomy. So it would be even against that if I tell them what to do. So look, guys, if you do this, you get that. If you do, here is the law about higher education. Here is the law of that. Take a look. Here is written. Here is this written. So your right address for a SU is Operation Parliament. No, it's not Parliament. It's the minister. Why? Because the law is here. Well, the practice is this. No, that's what you're going to do. It's up to you. So that would be obligation if they want. Yeah. I think less than that teacher did in where was
In Toronto.
Yeah, in Toronto. Maybe what his obligation is less than that.
Okay, we are running 15 minutes late, so I would suggest the Nenad is the last question. If you have different opinions, please let me know.
It's not a question. I have a small story to tell to illustrate. Actually, I agree with you that it can be very difficult. So I teach in Slovenia a bit. So in Slovenia we have the following situation: students are super privileged for the student work. Super privileged for the work, for working as waiters and.
Oh, I see. It's easier for them.
Yeah, because the employer doesn't pay taxes, so it's a huge issue, and students work like hell. A whole lot of students don't study; they work, and then the Slovenian government reduced the hours of work. You can't work 42 hours a week. And the students just exploded in protest. And plus, the student organizations that were organizing student work, we know that they were very corrupt. So it's like a really, and this is Slovenia, this is the European Union, and things should be like good. And here you are, the teacher. And there is a movement. And so I have a student who is very, very good student, brilliant student, who is activist anarchist. So I ask him, I say, look, you tell me what to do. And he says, look, I'm disgusted, but I have to support my colleagues. The whole thing is totally disgusting, but Yeah, it's very nice that you have to support your colleagues. What about us teachers? And everybody is disgusted. Nobody has the right answer. You know, and we would need Boran. You know, so tell me.
Moral counselor.
So we close with this promise. You promise, yeah? Witnesses.
Okay, thank you.
I would suggest 5 minutes. And then we